How's it going, everyone? Ryan here. Yes, the one and only, and I stand before you today to rank all of the booster course pass courses from Mario Kart. This will be like my tier list for the booster course pass in general. I'm not gonna do the base game courses because that'll take way too long. This is strictly for the booster course pass. Now, before I get started, I want to mention a few things. I'll be strictly covering 150cc, mainly because all of these courses were designed for that cc in mind. I don't really judge things on 200cc because, frankly, I don't think a lot of these courses were built for that. Another thing I want to mention is that I'll be doing this in order from SNES to Tour and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. So I'll be doing this chronologically instead of like from Wave 1 to Wave 6 because I think it's more appropriate to do it that way. And we also don't know if there will ever be a second booster course pass. So I'll be judging these like based on if they like deserve to exist or if what do they add in regards of the roster of these tracks. So that's sort of like what I'm judging these placements by, like if I like them and if they deserve to exist over other tracks, because there were a lot of tracks that like fan favorite tracks that were left out, specifically from DS and 7 and Double Dash, but I'll talk about that as we go along this tier list. So yeah, let's get this started. So first we got two SNES tracks. One I think is a bad example of how to remake a track, and another one is an amazing example of how to remake a track. So let's start with the bad one first. SNES Mario Circuit I think is the most nothing course that they ever brought to this game. Like they didn't even do anything with it. They just basically copied and pasted the track and gave it no like flair whatsoever. Like there's not even a single ramp, and even the shortcuts aren't even that interesting. They could have done so much. They could have done the Mario Kart 7 treatment and made it so much more interesting, like how that game remade its Mario Circuit track from SNES, but they didn't even fucking try with this, so it goes in D tier. And with that said, here's an example of an amazing way to remake an SNES track, SNES Bowser Castle 3. This is honestly like one of my all-time favorite Bowser's Castles now. It's up there with Mario Kart 8's and Mario Kart Wii's. I think those two are also my favorites, but I think this one is up there with them. They did so much to bring this track to life. They added so much material to the point where it's like almost unrecognizable. It almost feels like a new track entirely. There's a whole lot of like elevation, different paths to take, even though it's like you're going one way. You can go up the walls and trick off of those if you're skilled enough. All the obstacles are great. It looks amazing. This is like one of my favorite remakes of any track in general, let alone SNES. So yeah, this is definitely an S tier track for sure. Choco Mountain from N64, solid B tier course. I don't love it, I don't dislike it. It's just a solid course all around. I don't think it's amazing or anything, but it's a great remake of the track. It's probably the best version of the Choco Mountain track that we've gotten so far. I definitely prefer it over N64 and DS's version. So yeah, very solid track. Calamari Desert's probably the best it's ever been. I don't think it's S tier per se because frankly, I'm not really a huge fan of the N64 tracks in general. I think a lot of them are kind of overrated, but Calamari Desert does an amazing job modernizing the track. I love the fact that on the second lap, you have to go into the train tunnel, and then on the third lap, you go out of the train tunnel, and it's just and the shortcuts here are really awesome. It's just a great track all around. It's a great desert track. It was one of my favorites on 64, and it's definitely one of my favorites here, even though I don't think it's particularly S tier. Alright, now we move on to the Super Circuit tracks, and this one's going to be a little controversial. I'm going to put Sky Garden into A tier. Now, hear me out. It's very different from the original Sky Garden, no doubt, but in my opinion, I think a lot of the changes were still faithful to the original in mind, while also standing on its own as its own version of the track. I love how they remade the shortcut in the original. I love the addition of the mushrooms and the leaves that you bounce off of. I think it's a very satisfying course to drift on. It's no Cloud Top Cruise. Cloud Top Cruise is definitely like the best Sky track ever, but it's still Sky Garden, man. I'd still say it's probably my favorite Super Circuit track that they added. And with that said, let's move on to the other Super Circuit tracks. Snowland I'd say is B. It's a fine course. What really puts this in B though is that area skip that you can do with the mushroom. It's like one of the most satisfying area skips that you can do in the entire booster course pass. I love doing it every time I have a mushroom. It's amazing. It's honestly what makes this course B tier for me. Other than that, it's just a fine course. It looks pretty though. Boo Lake is probably another favorite of mine that they remade. It's a very short and sweet track, but I love the atmosphere. I love the elevation of the pier and then going into the water only to go out of the water. It's short, but it's a very satisfying track. Riverside Park, this has no reason to exist. They should have included Lakeside Park instead. I have no idea why they brought Riverside Park back. That track is nowhere near as good as Lakeside Park. And even though it looks pretty and I guess the piranha plants are a nice addition, I still think this is like one of the worst Super Circuit tracks. It's one of the most bland Super Circuit tracks for sure, and it's no different here. And this one really hurts. Sunset Wilds. What the fuck did they do to this track? This was one of the most unique tracks in Super Circuit, and they just absolutely butchered everything I loved about it. The sunset, that's gone. The tents that you could run into and have the Shy Guys latch on you for and steal your coins, that's also gone. And they literally did nothing else with it. Like, it's just a generic flat course with maybe a couple ramps and a few shortcuts, but that's literally it. Everything about the track is just, it's one of the most bland desert tracks ever. And that really hurts because the original version of the track is one of my favorites in Super Circuit. I absolutely hated what they did with this track, and it's honestly one of my least favorite tracks in the entire game. And now we move on to Double Dash. Waluigi Stadium, not a fan. I don't know why they brought this back over Wario Coliseum. That track is pretty much better in every way. But not only that, they even butchered the original too. Like, the fireballs don't even have proper hitboxes. It's much less narrow, therefore it's a lot easier. The piranha plant placements are a fucking joke. Like, why the fuck are the piranha plants shooting towards the sky? That literally makes no sense as an obstacle. The only thing that gives this track some life is the half pipes that lead to the upper pathways, but that's literally like the only thing I like about this track. Otherwise, I think we probably would have been far better off with Wario Coliseum instead. I mean, that track literally never got remade. Daisy Cruiser, S tier. It was S tier in Double Dash, it was S tier in 7, and it's S tier here too. I love how they remade this track in Mario Kart 7, and a lot of that is here too. The only thing that's bad about it is that the floaters are no longer at the end of the track, so that's a drawback, but it's a very, very small drawback. Otherwise, it's still one of the best Mario Kart tracks, and honestly kind of reminds me of that one yacht map in Black Ops 2, if anyone's ever played that. But yeah, it just perfectly captures the feeling of being on a cruise, and that's always what I loved about it. Definitely one of my favorites in Double Dash. Speaking of another favorite from Double Dash, DK Mountain. This is probably the quintessential DK themed track of all time. I love how they remade it. The barrel cannons is as satisfying as ever. Scaling down the mountain is as satisfying as ever. I love the half pipes. I love that area skip that you can do without the shroom. It's a perfectly remade track of a perfect track. Not much more to say. Shroom Ridge. Now, if this was like just DS in general, I would have put this in the C tier because this was never one of my favorite DS tracks. But the way they remade this, it's just so satisfying to drift on, and I love the two shortcuts. Both amazing shortcuts that really bring this track to life, and they just, I don't know, they did something with this track that made it really satisfying to drive on. Probably the best traffic course in the entire game, and that's including the base game. Waluigi Pinball, nothing to say, S tier. It was S tier in DS, S tier in 7, it'll always be S tier, it's Waluigi Pinball. Could they have used anti-gravity? Sure. Are there no shortcuts in Waluigi Pinball whatsoever? No, it doesn't need them. Waluigi Pinball is perfectly fine without any shortcuts. It's one of the most visually dazzling courses, and it perfectly captures the feeling of being inside a pinball machine. It's one of the most iconic Mario Kart courses for a reason. So yeah, easy S tier. Peach Gardens. Now, this was one of my favorites back on DS, but I'm honestly not the hugest fan of how they remade it here. The third lap really saves this remake for me. Like, I love what they did with the third lap, but other than that, I don't like how they watered down the track. I don't like that they got rid of the flower hedge mazes. I get that they wanted to make it easier to go backwards, but I kind of feel like they nerfed the flower hedge mazes way too much. I also don't like how they made the hedge maze smaller and easier to traverse. The chain chomps are like absolutely no threat at all. This was one of my favorite tracks in the original game, but I don't really like how they remade it here. The piranha plant's nice though, I like the addition of that. Mario Circuit, D tier. Not much to say, it's Mario Circuit. Like, we have like 10 Mario Circuits in this fucking game already. Like, why the fuck do we need another? And the fact that we got this over Airship Fortress, Luigi's Mansion, and Delfino Square is fucking insulting. Whoever the fuck thought this was a good idea to add to the Booster Course Pass, better go get fired. Like, that's all I need to say. And now we get to like the most oversaturated game in the Booster Course Pass, Mario Kart Wii, aside from Tour. I think they added way too many tracks from Wii, and a good chunk of them I think didn't need to be in this game. I think they would have been far better off adding more tracks from Double Dash, 7, and DS. But let's go over them one by one. Coconut Mall. This is an S tier course. It's Coconut Mall. What more is to say? perfectly captures the feeling of driving through a mall. I love the multiple pathways you can take through in and out of the mall. Yes, they nerfed the cars in the parking lot, but whatever. It's a very small nerf. It's not that big of a deal. Otherwise, it's a great course and it's remade perfectly. Mushroom Gorge, I have mixed feelings on. Like, sometimes it's an S tier course for me, but then sometimes it isn't. It is definitely one of the best tracks from Mario Kart Wii, but I don't know. Like, sometimes the mushrooms are kind of inconsistent depending on where you jump on them. I'm usually a fan of platforming in video games, but I feel like Mushroom Gorge, it's sometimes feels amazing, sometimes it doesn't. And that area skip at the end is probably one of the hardest things to pull off, which isn't a deal breaker for me, but it kind of gives you that feeling of like, if you don't perform this area skip, someone else will do it, and it doesn't matter. I guess I'm just not a big fan of area skips where it takes like a ridiculous amount of skill. They have to be like pitch perfect to execute them, like frame perfect. Whereas with something like DK Mountain has area skips, but they're much easier to pull off. Same thing with Snowland, much easier area skips, but they still require some skill and are very satisfying. Whereas this, I feel like, is like way too hard. I don't think it strikes that balance very well. But aside from that, Mushroom Gorge is still an amazing Wii track. Definitely one of the best ones. And speaking of one of the best Wii tracks, we have Maple Treeway. By far one of the best tracks in the entire franchise. I love how you traverse the trees. I love the multiple pathways you can take on the trees. It literally feels like a Mario Galaxy course brought to life. Yeah, it's one of those perfect courses that I have no complaints about. It was remade beautifully. DK Summit is B tier. It's not really my favorite snow-themed course. It's a great course, don't get me wrong, but for me, this is like a combination between DK Mountain and Mount Wario, and I don't think it's better than either. And not only that, I'm not a huge fan of the area skips. I think the area skips are way too hard to pull off, and call that a skill issue if you want. You can do the same with Mushroom Gorge. But I just don't think it strikes that balance of area skips very well, and that's sort of what holds it back for me. Whereas like these area skips, Snowland, DK Mountain, those are like far more satisfying area skips to pull off because they don't require like frame perfect accuracy. Whereas like with Mushroom Gorge and DK Summit, they kind of do. But that's a whole nother topic entirely. DK Summit's not my favorite snow track, and it's not even it's not even close to my favorite DK track in general. I know that'll piss some people off, but in my opinion, DK Mountain and DK Jungle to an extent are the quintessential DK tracks. Moonview Highway is basically a watered down version of Mushroom City, and the fact that we got this over Mushroom City is fucking insulting, because Mushroom City is like better in every way. And we already have like a billion other city tracks. Why the fuck did we get this? Literally the only good thing about Moonview Highway is the 2 shortcuts you can take at the beginning on top of the hills, but that's literally it. Everything else about the track is you're literally playing the game on autopilot. There's like no thought to how you get around the track. You just hit the boost panels. The cars are like rarely a threat. This is like one of the most boring traffic courses aside from Toad's Turnpike, and it's fucking insulting that we got this over Mushroom City. That's all I gotta say. Koopa Cape, one of the best Wii courses, has always been one of the best Wii courses. It's not the best version of the Wii course. I think the original still probably has the best version of this track, but it's still Koopa Cape at the end of the day, and it's always fun to race on. So no complaints. Daisy Circuit is C tier. I'm not that mad about its inclusion, but I don't think it deserved to exist in the Booster Course Pass anyway. It doesn't anger me as much as these courses in the D tier. It's actually not a bad course, but I'm just sort of indifferent about it. It is one of the better circuit tracks, I'll give it that, but it's still a circuit track, and it's from Wii when I would have far better off preferred something from DS or 7, or even Double Dash. Wii Rainbow Road. It's not my favorite Rainbow Road, but it's certainly up there as one of my favorites, and they remade it very beautifully here. It's a very challenging Rainbow Road, and I love that. It looks absolutely stunning. I love the set pieces. It's perfectly remade from the Wii version. There's not much to say about this. It's Rainbow Road from Mario Kart Wii. It's one of the best Rainbow Road tracks. It's not my favorite Rainbow Road. We'll get to that very soon. Toad Circuit. I have no fucking clue why they thought this was a good idea to bring this back from 7. It's one of the most boring tracks from 7. And not only that, they made it look worse than 7. How the fuck does a 3DS game made over 10 years ago have a version of this track that looks better than this? Like, that's fucking crazy. Like, it's not enough that they bring this track back. They make it look worse too. And then you have one of my favorite tracks from Mario Kart 7, Rock Rock Mountain. This is one of those less is more type of tracks that I really love. It's a very simple track, but it's very satisfying to race on. I love how you like glide down the mountain only to go up the mountain. It's a very satisfying gameplay loop. I love the gliding routes you can take and how you can trick off the pipes instead of just driving on the mountain. And this has one of my favorite area skips in the entire game. If you have like 3 mushrooms, you can just like go right and just take this gigantic ass shortcut that skips like over 50% of the course. And it's relatively easy to pull off, but it's always satisfying. And I love how you scale up the mountain, the rocks fall down on you, and it's anti-gravity. I love how they brought this course back. It's one of my favorite tracks in the Booster Course Pass for sure. And then you have 3DS Rainbow Road, which is probably the best Rainbow Road ever made and probably my all-time favorite track ever made. I love everything about the 3DS Rainbow Road. I love how you go through the entire solar system. I love how you race on Saturn's rings, how you fall down on the moon only to go back up on the Rainbow Road. You go through the cylinder to glide through star rings. Like, it just feels like you're going on a giant space adventure. And no Rainbow Road, in my opinion, captures that better than 3DS Rainbow Road. So yeah, easy S tier, like no questions, and is also an easy contender for the greatest Mario Kart track ever made. Rosalina's Ice World I've always found very underrated. It's not my favorite Mario Kart 7 track, but it is one of my more favorite ice theme tracks. I don't really like a lot of the ice theme tracks in Mario Kart. This one's one of my favorites because it's very satisfying to drift on, and I like the cool pathways you can take. You can go above or below into the water. And it's very satisfying to get above the water for some extra speed. And the right path has those boost panels and that shortcut at the end. It's a simple track, but it's a very fun track, especially considering that it's an ice track and I don't like most of them. Paris Promenade, it's a great tour track. It's one of those simple but effective tour tracks. I love how big it is. I love the multiple pathways you can take around the Eiffel Tower. I love the third lap that makes you go backwards. It has a really cool Piranha Plant shortcut at the beginning. It's just a fun tour track all around. Tokyo Blur, what the fuck did they do to Tokyo? Like, Tokyo's like gotta be like one of the most beautiful cities in the world, and they did it absolute injustice showing that with Tokyo Blur. This is like one of the most nothing courses I've ever played. There's like nothing that stands out in particular, so yeah. Ninja Hideaway I have mixed feelings on. It's definitely one of the better tour tracks, but what really holds this back for me is the fact that it's so fucking easy to fall off at the end if you don't take the right way all the time. Like, there's like multiple ways to go about the end of the course, and a lot of them make you just fall off the course, so it's like not even worth experimenting. But other than that, it's still an amazing course with multiple pathways, and I love how it like captures that ninja feel. It's a great track, don't get me wrong. I just don't think it's my favorite tour track per se. New York Minute, sort of similar to Moonview Highway. This is either C or D for me. I haven't really decided, but this is definitely like one of the worst tour tracks. It's basically like another Mushroom City that's not as good as Mushroom City. It's better than Moonview Highway, I suppose. I mean, I'll put it in C for now, but I might drop it in D later, depending on how this goes. I don't know. It's just, they did New York so dirty. It's such a small track. And even though New York is not doing very well nowadays, it's still like one of the most iconic locations, and the fact that they did so little with it is so insulting. Sydney Sprint, if this S tier stood for anything, it stood for Sydney. I love Sydney Sprint. I love how big the track is and how it feels like you're going through the entire city. I love how different each of the laps are. I love the ramps that you can take on the bridge. The shortcuts are very satisfying to pull off. And not to mention, the music is probably one of my favorite themes in the entire Booster Course Pass. Sydney Sprint's theme is an absolute banger. There are some other tour tracks that I think have some amazing music, but Sydney Sprint is definitely up there as one of those tracks that have amazing music. And not only that, it's just a great track in general. So yeah. Merry Mountain, I love the aesthetic of. It reminds me of Whoville from The Grinch, and I love the inclusion of the mountains in the background that remind me of Celeste. Other than that, it's just a fine course. It's not an amazing course. It's not a bad course. It's just like a very simple course. I wish they could have done a lot more with it. I felt like they were kind of holding back on ideas when it comes to making this like a full fleshed out track, but it's not a bad track. It's like right in the middle. London Loop, I'd say, is C tier. It's a very long course, and I admire that it's a long course. The problem is London is not really one of the most interesting places in the world, and this track doesn't really remedy that. It's one of the lesser tour tracks for sure. A lot of the track looks the same. What really brings this track to life is the music and the chain chomps, but that's about it. Berlin Byways, B for Berlin. This is a good tour track. I don't love it. I don't hate it. It's just a solid tour track. That's all I have to say about Berlin Byways. Music slaps though. Amsterdam, A for Amsterdam Drift. This is a great tour track. It's one of my more favorite tour tracks. I love the shortcut that you can take in the first lap. I love that you can go underwater in the second lap. I love the tulips in the third lap. It's a varied track with a lot to love. Not my favorite tour track per se, but it's definitely up there as like one of the better tour tracks for sure. Bangkok Rush is easily S. I love how varied this track is. I love how you can hop on the roofs. I love that you can go up the rail station just to go down the rail station, and the multiple pathways you could take down the rail station. I love that you can go into the parking lot just to go out of the parking lot and jump on top of those roofs and bounce off of them. It's very satisfying. I love the boats that you can ramp off of. This is like one of the most varied tracks. It has some of my favorite shortcuts and set pieces in a Mario Kart track. It's definitely one of my favorite tour tracks for sure. Singapore Speedway is probably a contender for my all-time favorite tour track. I love this track to death. It's like one of the most visually dazzling courses with some of the most varied track design. It just feels like one giant adventure through the city of Singapore, and it's one of the most beautiful looking cities like ever. Like the colors just pop out at you. I have nothing but good things to say about it. The music is amazing. The track itself is amazing. It's probably one of my all-time favorite tracks. I think Singapore Speedway is easily an S tier track, and that's probably what the other S stands for. Aside from Sydney, it stands for Singapore. Athens. A for Athens, and I promise I'm not doing this on purpose. But I just think Athens is a solid A tier course. I love how it captures Athens. I love how it makes you feel like you're going through the entirety of the ruins. I love the shortcuts. I love the multiple pathways. I love how ancient everything is. It's one of the most unique tour tracks, and definitely one of the better ones for sure. Los Angeles Laps. Contrary to what they did for New York, they perfectly captured LA here. They explored like every inch of it, from like the beaches to the cities to the industrial part of it. It's all perfectly captured, I'd say. The music is amazing. The track itself has amazing design. I love the baseball field. I love the baseball field that you go through. I love the gliding path that you can take through the construction site. It's definitely one of the most varied tracks when compared to the other tour tracks, and that definitely makes it S tier for me. Vancouver Velocity. This is either A or S, man. I love Vancouver Velocity. You know what? Screw it. I'm putting it in S. A lot of these tour tracks are really, really good. Like, not all of them are good, but a lot of them are. And Vancouver Velocity is probably one of my favorites. I love the music. The music honestly fucking slaps. It's one of my favorite Mario Kart themes, up there with Sydney Sprint and Singapore Speedway. It's a visually dazzling track. It has a lot of amazing set pieces and is very satisfying to drift on. I love the anti-gravity sections. I love the hockey stadium that you go through twice. It's just a great tour track all around. Not much to say. Rome Avanti, similar to Paris Promenade. It's just a simple but very fun track to drive on. And it's a very big track too, so you're driving through a lot of Rome, and it perfectly captures the feeling of driving through Rome at night. And it's a beautiful track. I love the aesthetic of it. Not my favorite tour track, but definitely one of the better tour tracks for sure. Piranha Plant Cove, I don't really have any strong opinions on. It's a solid underwater track, but I don't think it's my favorite underwater track. I personally like Dolphin Shoals the most in terms of underwater tracks. This one's good though. It's a solid B tier, but I don't think it really does anything that makes it stand out to me, at least. Madrid Drive, I'd say, is A tier. It's not my favorite tour track, but I love the set pieces. I love the wiggler in the city. The soccer field is fun. I wish we could have gone through that more than one lap, like in Vancouver Velocity. And there's some very satisfying shortcuts that you can take here. Not my favorite tour track, but definitely one of the better ones, an A tier track for sure. And now we move on to the last three courses, which are like all new tracks that they added to the Booster Course Pass. They were added to Tour, sure, but they were made with the Booster Course Pass in mind, so I saved them for last. First, we have Sky High Sunday. I'm a huge fan of Baby Park in the original game. I hate how they remade it, but Baby Park was always one of my favorite tracks in Double Dash because of the items and the carnage. Excite Bike Arena, one of my favorite Mario Kart 8 Deluxe tracks. It's basically a more fun version of Baby Park because there's a lot of ramps, and it perfectly captures Excite Bike. And this is sort of the same thing. It's basically like a more varied Baby Park. It is in essence a Baby Park, like a very long Baby Park, but there's a lot of variety here. You can glide down through the ice cream cone and then go up and scale up the ice cream. And then there's like this cool area skip that you can do if you drift off the ice cream, one of the ice creams in the right angle. It's a very like simple but very sweet track, no pun intended. And it's definitely one of my more favorite tracks. Probably not my favorite track, but I'd still say it's an S tier track. If I'd give Excite Bike Arena an S tier ranking, I'm gonna do the same for this because it sort of follows that philosophy of better baby park. Yoshi's Island is a contender for like greatest course of all time. They perfectly captured the essence of Yoshi's Island. I love all the Easter eggs and references from the game. I love that they brought all the enemies from it. I love that they included like so many of the locations from Yoshi's Island. I love the shortcut at the end that you can take if you hit the question mark cloud. I love how when you finish the track, it plays the gold music from the game. The music is just amazing in general. It perfectly remakes the athletic theme from Yoshi's Island. It's just a perfect track in general. I would honestly love to see more tracks like this where they perfectly remake just the feel of the game. Like, you know, how we sort of saw with Hyrule Circuit and the F-Zero tracks in the base game. This is sort of that same thing, but with Yoshi's Island. So yeah, easy S tier. Squeaky Clean Sprint, S for Squeaky Clean. Also an easy S tier, and I promise I'm not doing it just because it's S. It just has that perfect feel of like going through a giant bathroom. You go into the bathtub and you can trick off of the sponges and you go down the drain only to go out of the drain, and then you trick off of the toilet while you're gliding. I love tracks that like make you feel small in like giant locations, or you know, like sort of like Ribbon Road in the base game. And this track I think does it very well. It also has some of my favorite shortcuts, especially one alternate path that you can take like towards the end if you trick off of the toilet water or the bidet, whatever that is. So yeah, easy S tier. The music in this track is also one of my favorites in the whole game. And yeah, that pretty much makes up the entire Booster Course Pass. I think overall the Booster Course Pass was very successful. Yeah, I do believe that some of these tracks didn't really deserve to be in the game, but more often than not, I'm very thankful for Nintendo adding all of them to the game. Not all of them are bangers, unfortunately. I wish that Nintendo gave certain games more love than others. I wish they kind of toned back on Super Circuit and Wii in terms of tracks. But other than that, the Booster Course Pass, I'm glad it happened, and who knows, maybe we'll get a second one. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Maybe they'll just make a new Mario Kart game entirely where they include all Nintendo characters and it's basically like Smash Brothers but with Mario Kart characters. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. I'm excited for the future of Mario Kart. These past 2 years have been great, and I'm honestly going to miss having new Mario Kart tracks in the future. But who knows? Maybe there'll be a Booster Course Pass too. We don't know. All I'll know that whatever Nintendo decides to do with Mario Kart, I'll definitely be there for it. And yeah, that's all I really have to say. Thank you so much for watching this video. Once again, this is Ryan, signing off.